When I was still in elementary school, I experienced something truly disturbing in my grandfather's countryside home on my mother's side. I was told never to speak of it, but my grandfather has already been gone for about 10 years now, so I'll share it. If you don't want to get involved in something like this, it might be best not to read on. It's probably pointless to hide it since it becomes obvious if I talk about it, but my grandfather was born in a certain town in the Tohoku region of Japan. He was an odd person, quite picky for someone of his age. One thing that especially surprised me was how much he loved eating rice, yet he hated rice porridge. He also detested religion. Because my father had once been deeply involved with a new religious movement, I, too, came to dislike religion, so I rather admired my grandfather, who behaved so freely and wouldn't hesitate to show his distaste. Naturally, he hated religious festivals as well. There was one local festival in particular that he wouldn't allow even his own family to attend. That festival was what people often call crying sumo. You might have seen it at least once somewhere. They put babies in a sumo ring, and the one who cries first loses, or in some regions, the one who cries first wins. In our region, the one who cries loses. What's more, it's a town-against-town competition. They say it's an event to predict whether the harvest will be good or bad, but my grandfather absolutely refused to let me, as a baby, participate in that sumo. He wouldn't hear otherwise. Since that was before I was old enough to remember, I didn't know about it firsthand. But I do recall my parents often talking about how furious Grandpa had gotten. Apparently, he was yelling at the top of his lungs in a terrifying rage. Still, for all his quirks, my grandfather was very kind to me. He truly doted on me, as if I were the apple of his eye. After all, I was the only son of his only daughter. However, there was one thing he would never, ever forgive: crying. Once, when I fell on the riverbank and scraped my knee, I started bawling. Far from comforting me, he shouted, "Don't cry. Stop crying," and smacked me on the head. As a result, I grew into a kid who hardly ever cried. One New Year's holiday, our family went back to Grandpa's place. Because of my father's work schedule, it was a slightly late New Year's visit. We arrived in the countryside on January 6th. The next day, I planned to go visit a friend in the area, let's call him A. Whenever I went back for New Year's, it was my usual routine to go over to his place. A's family lived in an apartment building about 2 or 3 kilometers along the mountainside from my grandfather's house. About 10 years before all this, A's family had moved from a different prefecture, and our families had kept in close contact ever since. A had loads of video games, ones I could never get my parents to buy for me, so playing at A's place was always a treat. Early the next morning, too excited to wait, I got up and headed out while my grandfather and parents were still asleep. It was barely light out, but the snow piled along both sides of the road served as a sort of guide, so I walked straight toward my friend's home, or so I thought. Before long, the road suddenly turned into gravel. I thought to myself, wasn't this road paved? But since it had always been just one long, straight road, I had no doubts and kept going. Little by little, though, the path grew steeper. Around me, the trees thickened, and none of the surrounding scenery looked familiar. I guess this is a mountain trail? Maybe it's the wrong way. But it's a single road, isn't it? As I kept second-guessing myself, I'll go a little farther, and if it doesn't look right, I'll turn back. I ended up walking quite a distance. I became certain I'd taken the wrong path when I came upon a huge boulder blocking the way. It must have been 4 or 5 meters in diameter. Tied around it was something like a shimenawa, a sacred rope, complete with those little dangling paper streamers you often see in Shinto rituals. Sorry, I'm not too knowledgeable about these things, so that's the best way I can describe it. Even as a kid, seeing that boulder gave me a strange feeling, like the air around it was somehow warped, as if a thick sugar solution was swirling around in slow motion. The moment I saw it, I completely forgot about going to see my friend or playing games. It was as though I was being guided or drawn in. I went right up to the rock, put my hands on it, and began tracing its surface. I circled around the rock a few times. Then I got the sense that this dense, swirling atmosphere wasn't emanating from the rock itself, but rather from underneath it. Slowly, while tracing along the rock with my fingers, I crouched down. For reasons I couldn't explain even to myself, I started digging into the dirt with my bare hands. It felt like something important was buried there. My hands started moving faster and faster. Ring. Ring. At some point, I realized there was a faint sound of bells in the air. Ring. 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 The bell sounds were getting closer. I could also hear something like a song. I couldn't quite make out the words, but it sounded like a woman's voice, murmuring something like times, Atanyasaki, wasit, batakusa, batakusa. When I heard that, I remember my spine tingling, and at the same time, a wave of sadness welled up inside me. I felt an overwhelming urge to cry. By the time I had dug so deep that my palms were practically below ground level, I suddenly came back to my senses. "You fool!" someone shouted. When I turned around, I saw my grandfather charging toward me in a towering rage. This was a man who usually needed a cane, who knew he could run that fast. Taken aback by his furious expression, I also felt something cold grab my hand beneath the soil. Startled, I looked down at my hands. Between my arms, there was a red-black ear, about the size of a human face, stuck to the ground. I don't know why I was certain it was an ear, but there was a fist-sized, pitch-black hole surrounded by uneven red-black folds that seemed to be listening to my every move. Cry, 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 cry. I could hear a shrill, high-pitched voice from underground. My memory goes blank from that moment. When I came to, I was looking up at a wooden ceiling. Then I saw my grandfather and my parents in my field of vision. My parents looked relieved, mumbling, thank goodness," under their breaths. Meanwhile, my grandfather's face was still contorted in anger. He told my parents to leave us alone. They reluctantly left the room. I ended up sitting in Caesar, kneeling position, facing my grandfather. I figured he was about to lecture me. But instead, he abruptly began to speak. "When I was about your age, I had the same experience once. From here on, this is my grandfather's story of what happened to him. When Grandpa was a kid, around New Year's just like now, he and a friend went into the mountains to play and came upon a boulder. Let's call this friend B. Grandpa and B figured there was something buried under the rock, so they started digging, just like I did. Bells began ringing all around them, and there was a voice like a nursery rhyme for playing with a handball. Atanyasaki, wasit, batakusa, batakusa. Even now, Grandpa couldn't forget that woman's voice. They discovered that under the rock lay a cavity, a cave. It should have been pitch dark inside, yet it was dimly illuminated by some sort of faint light. A foul stench hung in the air, like rotting animals. Both of them felt nauseated, but they peered in through the hole they had dug. They saw the bottom about 2 or 3 meters down. The floor sloped downward from where they were toward the back of the cave. "Grandpa, man, it stank." "B, it sloped inside, huh?" Just as B said that. Cry, 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 cry. They heard that shrill voice, and it sounded like something was slithering up that sloped floor. B couldn't hold it in anymore and started bawling. "Batakusa, batakusa, batakusa, batakusa." Grandpa looked up, thinking the woman's voice was coming from outside. Surrounding them were human-shaped figures wearing black kapogi, the traditional cooking smock. Their faces were scribbled over with black, as though scribbled out with a black crayon, so there were no visible features. "Batakusa, batakusa, 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 batakusa." B was still crying. Grandpa was frozen in terror, he couldn't move at all. "He's crying, he's crying, he's crying, he's crying." From inside the hole, that monster's piercing voice kept getting closer. The black kapogi figures started touching B all over with a soft rustling motion. "Batakusa, batakusa, 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 batakusa." Wow! Grandpa let out a scream. Suddenly his strength returned, he could move again. So he left B behind and ran home as fast as he could. B never came back after that. When Grandpa told his parents what happened, they strictly forbade him from ever speaking of it to anyone. The entire village searched for B, but they never found him. Later, Grandpa learned from his own father, my great-grandfather, what that monster was. You're not supposed to say its name aloud. Just uttering it can draw it near. That's why we refer to it as Gogyō-sama. Gogyō-sama was treated just like the Buddha in these parts. People believed that Gogyō-sama alone determined whether there would be a bountiful harvest. From this point on, Grandpa's story was quite long, so I'll summarize the gist. Long ago, there was a castle here. Now, not even a trace of it remains. This castle had an unusual design, like a nightingale floor, but instead of creaking, it made bell-like sounds whenever someone walked down the corridors. For that reason, it was called Suzuho, or Bell Castle. The lord of that castle had large ears and a tiny mouth. That man hated conflict above all else. At the time, the local farmers were fighting over land ownership or something along those lines. Furious at the strife, the lord distributed land equally among them. Also, it seems the lord was originally from Tang, China, and some of the local farmers despised him for that. One day, a group of these farmers revolted, burned Bell Castle to the ground, slaughtered the lord's entire family, and threw the lord himself into a vertically dug cave. From then on, that region was plagued by natural disasters. The crops failed, the people starved. Soon enough, they began saying it was divine punishment. As you might guess, these people started offering human sacrifices to the source of that vengeful spirit. To ensure equality when selecting babies from the village, they had them face off in pairs, whichever baby cried would fight, and the last one left crying in the end was made the sacrifice. This was the origin of crying sumo. Because the lord from Tang had a very small mouth, he could not directly consume an entire infant. The farmers prepared okayu, rice porridge, his favorite dish, by cutting up the babies and mixing them in before pouring the concoction into the cave. Over time, that rotting mess built up on one side of the cave's bottom, making the floor slope downward, or so the story goes. People came to regard that vengeful spirit as an accursed existence, giving it the name. However, apparently, it rejected that name. Over the next few years, a great famine hit, taking many lives. Everyone claimed it was the doing of. Eventually, the people took to calling it Gogyō-sama and enshrined it as a local deity. They sealed off the cave with a massive boulder. The practice of sacrificing infants vanished, at least on the surface. Grandpa continued. Gogyō-sama still hungers for sacrifices. My friend B was originally fated to become one. See, there's a house on the mountainside. It's an apartment now, right? They deliberately lease those apartments to people from out of the prefecture, folks who know nothing of Gogyō-sama. That's why they cry so easily. B was also from there. He had no idea that crying meant he'd get taken. Just last year, the little boy from that place went missing. Decades have passed, and to this day, children still go missing at the same time of year. It doesn't happen every year, but counting the cases I know of, there have been 6. Each time a child disappears, there's a town-wide search, but the child is never found. Naturally, because they all end up in that Nanozoko, the sloped bottom of the cave. Everyone who's in the know refuses to search there. No one wants to be eaten themselves, so they just accept that there will be a sacrifice. They're even grateful it wasn't their own child. I feel the same way. It's sad that A went missing. But does that mean I should be the one under that rock? That's what it comes down to. We have no idea what exactly is. I don't want to know. And even if I did, I'd prefer never to get involved again. There are still places like that in Japan. Sari, Nesna, Gogyō, Hakobara, Hotokanoza, Suzuna, Suzushiro. These are the 7 herbs.